Welcome to the fourth in the SunGuard 2020 webinar series on infrastructure as a service, and this one is entitled From Legacy to Leading. We're joined today by a panel of experts: George Christophe, Senior Cloud Consultant from SunGuard Availability Services, Rich Gore, IT Senior Manager for Cisco, and Perry Wald, Managed Services Product Architect at SunGuard Availability Services. During the course of the webinar, we'll also be running an interactive poll, and today's question is: what is your primary objective in migrating legacy apps into the cloud? So let's begin. Many organisations evaluating infrastructure as a service are looking to support legacy systems as well as cloud-ready applications. And this discussion will look at the key considerations when assessing legacy systems as part of a broader migration strategy. So gentlemen, perhaps we want to start the discussion by understanding what do we mean by legacy systems in this context?
In this context, it seems like a legacy system are the business applications that you're running today in your data center in a non-cloud environment. It's the stuff that runs your business. It's critical, it's valuable, and the question on the floor is: at what point and how do you migrate that into cloud?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that legacy used to mean, I think we all saw legacy as meaning the old stuff, the stuff that was 3 years plus old, what needed to be replaced. And I think now legacy has almost taken this picture of what is not cloud. Everything that's not cloud is legacy, and therefore what do we do with it, as if there's something wrong with it. And I think actually we need to turn that around and say, okay, there's advantages to taking legacy stuff, i.e. non-cloud stuff, and putting it into the cloud. There's processes that you need to think about to do that, but not, legacy has now changed its meaning almost and is saying everything that's not in cloud. So the question is almost not what do we do with the old stuff we want to chuck away, but what do we do with the stuff that isn't in cloud, and how do we move forwards with that?
What's the path of migrating, and which do you migrate first?
Yes.
How do you migrate it?
I mean, legacy can mean slightly different to different companies, so especially where systems have been there for many, many years and have embedded themselves very well within the operational infrastructure of a company. They regard that as a legacy system, something that works to its optimal performance for them, for their business users, and they don't really want to touch it. So there's that hesitancy which could cause a bit of disruption to business users as such.
Well, I think that point you make about optimal performance is, I think that one of the things that is vital to look at with systems when you're going into the cloud is, what do you suddenly have to be more granular about what you're thinking about. You suddenly have to look at your estate. Somebody said to me only yesterday, well, up until now, we've just put this big wall around our entire estate and looked at it as one entity, one estate, one group of kit, and that's all ours, and we don't have to worry. And suddenly you have to start being a bit more granular and working out, well, which bits will benefit by what? Where will something work well in a cloud type scenario? Where will something not? Where will optimal performance be defined by stuff that you need to have SLAs on that you can only assert yourself? Where will optimal performance be anything which is better than X? And you can get that in a shared environment. So it's trying to balance all those needs. So I think that question of, what's legacy is everything you haven't got in the cloud. And the question about migrating legacy to cloud is very much around not just going, I need to pick this up and put it in cloud, but do I need to pick it up? What do I want to do with it? Is it suitable to pick up? What's my path forwards conceptually, rather than just how do I move this box from position A to position B?
And what are the interconnections between the things that I'm moving into a cloud environment and the stuff that's still left behind? Because they are talking to each other. There's no application that's an island unto itself.
They're the kind of things you really uncover once you get into doing a kind of an assessment or a capacity plan as such, and delving into the applications, how they work with their back-end, legacy pieces of hardware with the kind of database platforms, for example. It's something that you can't just say, right, we'll take a piecemeal and move it over. It's something that you have to plan and migrate as a complete group of applications.
But I think there is a piecemeal approach, though. I think there are two things. I think there is the piecemeal approach that says, the toe in the water. Let's try a few things. Let's see what works. Let's test out what we think will work well for us, and then there is the strategy piece, and they both have to go in parallel. Is that the piecemeal bit is the try it out, and the strategy piece is in the big picture, what benefits do I get from going to cloud? How do I do it? Do I just shift systems in? Or actually, do I want to do something cleverer where I'm not saying, well, I'll take a system that runs this way, but looking at that system and saying, what are the limitations that has at the moment, and how could I resolve those limitations by doing something in a different way, by implementing a solution in a different way?
And the way we did it at Cisco was pretty much following that step by step. It was terra incognito for us. We put our toe in the water. We tried it out with some applications that were maybe less critical. And as we got more comfortable with it, we were able to migrate more and more of our applications, our business apps, into the cloud. And finally, the things that were more core, more legacy to us, once we got comfortable enough, we were able to migrate pretty much our entire ERP, our Oracle-based ERP systems into a cloud environment. But we sure wouldn't have moved those first.
But I think it's interesting because I don't know what you guys think, but I see a lot of companies starting their toe in the water by saying, well, we'll put test and dev. And I almost want to say to people, don't choose test and dev as the thing that you're trying out an environment on, because test and dev is the messy bit of your business. It's the uncontrolled, it's the constantly changing, it's the non-production bit.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to put that into a cloud. I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm saying it's very hard to put that into a cloud environment and then infer from that anything meaningful about what you could do with your legacy applications.
Good point. And yet, test and dev is a really good environment to put into the cloud. Not saying you're right, that it should be limited to that, but the fact that you can automate the process of putting new applications in a cloud environment. You can open up a new virtual machine in a few minutes, pop in your test environment, and run it until you're satisfied. Maybe a couple weeks later, and then pull it back out again. And that's what is just optimal for cloud.
But then looking at a legacy migration, what would be the rationale, what would be the objectives behind it? What are businesses looking to achieve both technically and in terms of the business case?
The statement I hear from a business perspective most about why I want to move my legacy systems into the cloud is I want to rid myself of CapEx. I want to get away from that. Every 3 years I've got a big upfront spend, I've got a big bang that I have to plan for. And that almost on that third year knocks me out from being able to do anything else. So I think from a business perspective, a big driver is the CapEx. And the driver is to move towards this OpEx model where there is, one would like a known cost. One would like, I think they're called known unknowns, is that one would like a known cost of service within specific limits. So I think that's a big move towards the cloud at the moment. But I think at the moment, a lot of cloud movement, it is almost a sort of clever leasing plan. It's a way of relieving the CapEx and moving it into OpEx. It's not necessarily taking advantage of the flexibility.
Well, that's a real attraction. But some other attractions are speed of deployment. When you have an automated cloud lifecycle management structure, you can deploy infrastructure, deploy applications, remove them relatively quickly, and you can also utilize the resources better. And you've seen this in customers who are looking at applications that maybe they don't know how much resource, how much storage, how much processing they're going to need. So they just they sequester an enormous amount and say that's what I'm going to give to my application. When in reality, they're only using 10% of that. We do this a lot at Cisco. But with a cloud environment, you can go in and say, well, I'm going to dedicate a certain number of cores, a certain amount of storage. If I need more, I'll just pick up some more in a few minutes.
And also, I mean, with the legacy side of things, if you're going to try to move into a cloud, and you can move onto a cloud platform, it gives you a bit of flexibility, especially from the IT infrastructure perspective of the guys who have to recover that server in an event of disaster, for example. They have got a bit of more flexibility of recovering something on a virtual platform than having to go into a server room and actually put a hands on some equipment which is sitting there, which is everyone's a bit kind of hesitant to go and touch due to its importance, due to its, it hasn't broken for so long and I'm going to go and put my hands on it kind of thing. So there's that kind of.
Well, there's human caused outages whenever somebody goes in and starts messing with the cabling anyway.
Exactly.
So yeah.
I think though, I mean, you said business and technical, and I don't know whether I want to call it a technical objective of moving to the cloud or a technical advantage that is a requirement, but I think there is a requirement to take legacy systems and to stop them being such silos, to stop it being one box, one application, one server, and try and pull it apart a bit, so that you actually start getting that advantage. You talked about, the system that only uses 10% of the resources, but within that, there will be different components, some of which need very, very specific performance stats, and some of which don't matter so much. The batch and we used to talk in the mainframe world about batch and interactive, and you compare the two. And I think there is a requirement, and it's a technical objective, and it's an advantage to make businesses more agile if they can take those core business applications and say, this is what it's made up of. Instead of treating it as one big box, pull it apart a bit and say, well, within that function, within that ERP function, there are multiple different processes going on. So can we move billing, and can we move just-in-time provisioning into a more flexible environment, because they might have requirements to flex up and flex down. But this bit at the back, which is data mining, we don't want to touch.
Right.
And so I think that it's that ability to pull apart, that when you can start seeing that you don't have to look at silo, chunk, big block approach, that is when you can start getting advantages. But it does mean that you have to have that interaction between cloud and physical, between public and private and shared. You've got a lot of interactions going on there. And
I think within that pulled apart, separated environment, you still need to be able to create some sort of an application profile that means that says, even though it's in the cloud, even though I may not know what part of the infrastructure that bit is sitting on, it's still going to get the processing level, the number of cores, the amount of storage, the type of security, the type of network connectivity that it would get if I had dedicated a physical server to it. You still have to somehow provide that in the cloud.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think one of the big challenges is that, to coin a phrase, you're not going to find one cloud that fits all purposes. You're not going to find, because actually the features that will be a real advantage to sort of the pure play cloud, they're very, very flexible, very, very spin up on demand. That may not even have an OS in it. We've got cloud providers that don't offer an OS basis. Everything has to be written in Ruby and Java, etc., all the way through to the other end where you've got physical devices. And I think that trying to get that balance right means you're never going to have one provider.
That brings us to an interesting point, because to maintain these legacy systems requires a skill set in-house for perhaps obsolete platforms or languages, and with an ageing workforce, you're starting to lose those skills over time. So from a financial perspective, is migration of legacy applications to cloud infrastructure about doing the same thing at lower cost, or is it really about getting more for the same expenditure?
With that kind of approach to things, as obviously time goes by, and if legacy apps have been around for a while in a company, you slowly lose a bit of knowledge base as time goes by, and people change jobs or retire, and taking new people on to replace those roles, you seem to look for people with new skill sets rather than old, and then you've still got to give support in-house for that system, so it becomes a bit more difficult for customers. So hence, if there is a way of being able to put it onto a cloud platform going forward, that eases a lot of pain from being able to be flexible with that application and being able to depend on people in-house to look after it and to be able to get you out of a pickle, for example. And there's certain kind of elements of risk that you can reduce by being able to virtualize it and be flexible at that. So,
I think that's true. I think that to answer that specific question of are you looking to get the same for less or more for the same? I actually think most people want to get more for less. But I think the opportunity should be to say, well, by having this flexibility, by having this approach where we're not tied so much to equipment that we've invested in, and this equipment has to last us for 3 to 5 years. By abstracting the requirement from an immediate capex expenditure, to be able to say, well, I want to be able to spend the same but do more, but not just do more differently. So I'm almost suggesting that, it's time for the IT department to start leading rather than implementing. For the IT department to start saying, well, actually, we're the people who see all the problems that come in the business. So rather than just saying, well, this is a problem, is it fixable within this application, within this legacy system, or this is a problem, can we get a patch for it, can we work around it? To start saying, well, actually, forget about the technical bits, here are a bunch of business challenges we get, and how do we resolve that business challenge, and where can that take a business? And I've got an example that comes completely out of the sort of consumer world, but there was a challenge that Twitter was a text-only function. Twitter, 140 something characters of text, that was it. Yeah. And people wanted to share more than that. Facebook had a picture function, but people wanted to be able to Twitter pictures. And a couple of guys said, well, actually, we've got this answer, Instagram. And Instagram was the way of being able to merge two technologies together. It was actually to pull apart the consumer side. It was a business answer to a problem that existed that nobody realized was a problem because the legacy application, Twitter, just didn't support it.
Yeah.
And what we've been able to do, we see there a business that has gone from 0 to what it sold last week for $1 billion. There's a massive, massive growth in a business because somebody didn't look at it from how do we fix the problem on this legacy system.
Do the same thing with less money.
Right. But somebody said, how do we bring something new to the picture that will help the people who are using it? I mean, that's a consumer world, but it's that same concept. I think IT needs to drive towards that, and the cloud allows it.
And that brings us to an interesting point, because the reason that legacy apps are still maintained and perpetuated is because there is a heavy user reliance on them. So in order to alleviate any concerns when looking at a migration strategy, what sort of questions should organisations be posing to prospective service providers?
The main thing is, well, there's not one main thing, there's quite a few components which customers would be looking for and should be looking for. You want a service provider to be able to provide you with the necessary to cater for a hybrid solution if necessary. If you need to move a legacy system as is and, have part of your infrastructure out on a cloud platform, or you need any additional hardware which is part of the infrastructure, you need them to be able to cater for the hybrid side of things. Also, to be able to provide you with some kind of consultancy assistance and validation for cloud readiness, be able to do some kind of capacity management for you to find out what you're currently using, and kind of try and size a best fit solution to your needs, rather than what you have now might not be actually required on a cloud platform. It's again, what you touched on earlier, only 10% utilisation on some services across infrastructures are found. It's only the high-end database or transactional servers which are actually using most of their resources, but usually it's about 10%. So,
I think you touch on something really key there. I think you touch on that partnership, is that the service provider used to always be the guy who just provided you with power, with cooling.
The cage, the rack, the power.
Exactly. Yeah. And the consultant used to be the person who would come in and work with your team internally to develop the ideas, to look at the ways to go forwards. And I think that the service provider now has to get involved in that. And in fact, they haven't just got to take what is it that you want to do, Mr. Customer, and here's how we can bring our suite of products to help you do it. They've also got to be able to say, okay, so now I'm starting to get familiar with you. It's that partnership relationship. I'm starting to get familiar with what your business does, with how your business functions. And we've got this other set of things that you've not even thought about, but I could bring that into the picture. Yeah. And that could solve a set of problems you didn't know you had.
Yeah, it's working IT up into that business stack as opposed to down into the first 3 layers.
Absolutely, and I think that leads us to the conclusion that to successfully turn legacy systems into leading applications, That really means starting out with the right infrastructure provider and nurturing that relationship. Gentlemen, unfortunately we've run out of time on the main panel discussion, so we're now going to move on to some audience questions. And the first one is, how can I prepare the business case for migrating a legacy system when it's really difficult to quantify the true cost of ownership today?
It is difficult to quantify the true cost of ownership. Whenever we do that inside Cisco, we have to step back and look at the current costs to benchmark how much we're spending in terms of network equipment, network connectivity, server and storage equipment, power and space and cooling that supports all that. And then all the sysadmins and the people who support that entire system. You have to pretty much, charge out and allocate costs from all of those different areas to figure out how much you're paying now. And then look at your alternative, whether your alternative is going to an infrastructure as a service provider or providing it in a different type of data center, or just carving out some space in the data center floor and building your own private cloud. You have to look at then the costs of doing all that.
I think there's another thing as well, though. I think you have to think about putting in place before you start some metrics to measure, because we're not talking about capex spend anymore and known monthlies. We can be talking about completely unknown monthlies.
Yeah.
You need to be able to put in place a structure before you start moving things that says not only here was my total cost of ownership and here was my expected new cost of ownership, but then an effective way to measure that, because that might go up. But that might go up because your business is being more flexible and you're achieving more with it. So you've got to be able to balance that out to not just understand the cost today, but how are you going to measure the benefits
that have nothing to do with doing the same thing in a different way.
Yes.
Being able to do new things that very hard to provide, metrics for that.
I've just got the results in from our audience poll, and the primary objective for the majority of our audience is OPEX versus CAPEX. So that's interesting to get that as a counterpoint to your argument. We have another question now that's just come in saying, I have multiple sites and I'm looking at how cloud can support legacy applications, but what am I looking for in terms of resilience?
Good design, good architecture. And I don't mean good architecture of the cloud. I mean good architecture when you're putting the thing into the cloud. People have got this impression, a cloud, amorphous bubble. And it gives this impression that it's all just taken care of and that we don't need to apply good architecture anymore. And there is a huge requirement to still work out that whole virtual data center. To how would you design something for a physical data center, and then starting to map that onto how would you design it for a virtual. If you can take advantage of some of the functionality that helps you, some of the back-end replication systems that can be in place, that's great. But don't dismiss the architecture piece, because actually sometimes when you're letting go of control of the physical, the architecture becomes even more important, because you can't just bolt something on to fix it later on.
And you make a lot of assumptions that it's always going to be in this one spot, when in cloud it's not going to be. With cloud, you're no longer dependent on a single physical piece of infrastructure, but you're still dependent on all the different dependencies, the application dependencies that connect that one application with all the other applications in the environment.
Interestingly, I'd like to flip that around, is that there is another side, which is understanding what resilience cloud does give you. And we were talking about this before the meeting, is a lot of people in a physical world build a bunch of resilience in to try and cover for single piece of hardware failure.
Right.
And often the requirement isn't non-stop functioning, it's minimal downtime. It might well be downtime of seconds or minutes. It's accepted that there might be disruption to service for seconds or minutes, but look at cloud as well for that, because suddenly you flip that over, is that where you'd have had clustered systems and multiple systems, you may well not need that anymore. So do look at that side of it as well. Yeah,
you can actually save quite a bit of money in terms of the very underutilized equipment you were using for backup.
Okay, well, I think that concludes our audience questions. So thank you to our panel for participating and to our audience for attending. We hope you found the discussions informative today. A video of this webinar will be available to watch on demand at the 2020 Webinars website, and you can also view the preceding webinars in the series. Thank you very much and goodbye.